Hello, friends. I've recently been playing Satisfactory again to check out the changes from patch 1.1, and as I often do after large patches, I decided to start a new factory. Because I've now done this a bunch of times, I've developed an approach to a new base start that allows me to quickly start building a base without having to handcraft too many items, or deal with temporary layouts, or even to not spend much time idling or waiting for anything to be produced. In this guide, I'll share how I approach the first few milestones of the game until you get your space elevator set up. What I like about this approach is that you're always making progress towards the next tiers and parts manufacturing. While this is not the fastest way to get the space elevator up, following the guide means that the factory will be producing useful end products the entire time. The approach works no matter where you start in the game, but I do assume that you're staying near the starting areas. I'm showing footage of the desert, but the steps are the same no matter where you start. Locations and exact outputs depend on the exact location and veins that you tap, but you'll generally want to tap pure veins if they're available or normal if you can get to those. This guide also assumes that you are starting a new game and have checked the option to skip the Tier 0 intro. If this is your first playthrough, I do recommend that you play through Tier 0 at least once, but this guide might still be useful if you're doing that. If you're a veteran of the game and you've played multiple times, this guide will probably not be as useful to you, but I would still be curious to know if you yourself take the same kind of approach or if you find yourself playing in a more leisurely manner. In any case, as soon as you land, your immediate goal is to grab biomass so that you can power some basic mining. I like to gather one full 500 stack of leaves, and ideally I will also pick up some wood, as wood is much more efficient than leaves for making biomass fuel. Our goal is to start manufacturing iron plates and rods, copper wire, and concrete, as they are all required to advance your initial tech tiers. We're also going to be using them to build an initial factory structure. And to do that, we're going to use 4 miners, 3 smelters, 4 constructors, and 4 containers. And of course, any supporting power poles, cables, and belts. Once you have 500 leaves, you should go find a couple of iron ore veins. You should be able to quickly find a pair of them close to your starting area. We're going to use 2 veins because initially we don't really have access to splitters that would allow us to split our production from a single ore vein. Once you locate the iron ore, find a more or less flat area nearby and place your hub. Don't worry too much about the placement as we are going to be moving it later, but make sure it's out of the way from the ore veins. After placing it, go ahead and place a miner on one of the veins. Then select the smelter to place next, hold down Control to line it up with the miner, and place your smelter fairly close to the miner. We're trying to minimize how many resources we use on belts initially, as right now we are limited to our starting inventory. Then do the same thing with a constructor, and finally a storage container. Next, we connect everything with belts, and then we set the refinery to produce iron ingots and the constructor to produce metal plates. Now we can go back to the hub and using the workbench, create biomass from all the leaves and wood in your inventory. Then split your biomass into 3 even stacks. In my case, I had enough for 3 stacks of 150 biomass, but your numbers may vary depending on how many leaves and woods you ended up gathering. Now go to the end of the hub that houses the 2 biomass burners. We're going to need 1 additional burner to power up our initial setup, so go ahead and place one down close to the hub and then connect everything with cables. Now we will finally connect the cable from here to your iron plate assembly line. You should note the production powering up now via the status indicators that go from red to green or yellow. Yellow just indicates that they have power, but they don't have resources, which shouldn't take that long to start arriving. Okay, so now we turn our attention to the second vein of ore. We're going to repeat the same setup that we used for the iron plates, but this time we set the constructor to produce iron rods. Then we create more power poles and cables and connect everything to power. We should now be producing both rods and plates in an automated way, and so we can turn our attention to making wire. We need to find a copper vein, which should be fairly close if you're in the starting area. Once you decide which way to go, connect the cable to a live power pole and head toward the copper vein. Place down more poles and cables until you get to the copper vein. Depending on your setup, it may be necessary to manually mine some copper and create additional wire and cables. Most likely you'll still have enough to connect your copper assembly line. In any case, we're going to use the same setup that we used for iron here, but we are going to set the smelter to produce copper ingots and the constructor to produce wire. Once this is up and running, head back to the iron assembly area and pick up any rods and plates in your storage. You should also check how much fuel you have used already, and if your reserve is low, it's time to gather more leaves and wood and make more biomass. But if you gathered enough for 150 biomass per burner initially, you should probably still be fine to continue on to concrete next. Okay, so now we'll search for the limestone deposit. There should be one nearby, as these are typically close to the iron and copper in the starting areas. Once you find it, extend your power toward it and place your miner, constructor, and storage, and connect everything to power. Concrete can be made directly from the mined limestone, so we don't need a smelter here. It may be necessary at this point to make a small amount of concrete by hand if you've been placing a lot of power poles. I recommend giving yourself some extra room between the miner and the constructor this time, so that we can fit a splitter and additional constructors later. Concrete is key to building foundations, and we're going to want plenty of it soon. When the concrete assembly is up and running, go back to the copper assembly and pick up all of the wire that's ready. You'll want 300 wire for our first milestone. Then you head back to the iron storage and pick up any rods and plates that are there and head back to the hub. We should now be ready to clear the first milestone. I recommend first unlocking logistics. This milestone gives you access to splitters, which we're going to want to use in order to expand production. Select logistics, load the required materials, and push the red button.
Split and lift to save space and enhance the productivity of your factory. Fix it in.
Okay, now we can head back to the limestone area in order to expand it. At this point, we're still limited in our ability to expand by the max output of the Mark I miner and the max belt load of the Mark I belt. From a single limestone vein, we can only support 3 constructors making concrete. But since that is significantly more than 1, I always upgrade to 3 in this part. So we remove the belt from the miner to the constructor, and we add a splitter in between, and then add additional constructors to either side of the current one. Set the recipe to concrete, connect everything by belts and power. Now, with more concrete being made, we want to start expanding our power base. Go back to the hub area. Our initial stacks of biomass are likely close to running out now, and we want to avoid running out altogether if we can help it. Aligned with the original burner that we put down close to the hub, place 4 more biomass burners. Then, place splitters in front of them, ensuring that they are all pointing in the same direction, toward your first burner. Now we can link everything with belts. Now run the belt from the last splitter a good distance from the burners to allow yourself room for expansion, and then place a splitter with the belt that you just made at its output point. Then we place 2 constructors and connect them via belts. Set one constructor to produce biomass from leaves, and then the other to produce biomass from wood. Now, using the control key, line up storage containers with the input of each constructor. Make sure the arrows are pointing the right way towards the constructor. Now we can go scavenging for more leaves and wood and dump each into the appropriate container. These will then be made into biomass, which will automatically be fed into the biomass burners to generate power. Don't forget to connect everything to your power grid before you get more fuel. Well, now that power's taken care of, go check on your concrete. If you have 200 concrete by now, you can unlock the base building milestone at the hub. At this point, your most basic setup is done, and you have some options. Either you can continue expanding on the ground as you have been, or it's time to spend a bit of time creating a factory floor. If your goal is efficient use of your time, I would recommend spending time using the concrete to build a large factory floor area. I like to build vertically on top of the veins that I'm mining, but you should follow your own instinct. Now, run through the containers, grab any copper wire, metal plates, and iron rods that are sitting on the containers. The field research milestone requires 300 wire, 300 screws, and 100 iron plates. Because we haven't yet set up screw production, we'll want to manually make them at the hub. To make the 300 screws, we need 75 rods. Put everything together at the hub and then launch this shuttle. While we wait for the shuttle to return, we should work on producing the first assembly line for screws on the factory floor. Your vein purity is going to dictate how many constructors you should plan to use. If you have a pure node, you should plan your layout based on Mark II belts, as that way you will maximize the output of the Mark I miner. After we unlock the parts assembly milestone, we'll be using this assembly line to create reinforced iron plates. Here is the simplest layout that you'll want based on your vein purity. Instead of the assembler, simply place down a storage container for now so that we can capture the output of screws. You'll want to convert the miner currently making iron plates into this setup, as we're still going to need all of the iron rods being made on the other vein to progress the milestone. Since we're going to take the iron plate constructor offline for a while, go to your metal rod constructor, place a splitter between the constructor and the smelter, and then place a second constructor down. Then set it to build iron plates and give it a storage container. That should allow you to continue to pick up iron plates as needed. This is also a good time to do the same thing with the copper wire constructor, but instead add a splitter between this constructor and the storage. Then add a constructor that will turn the wire into cable. You're going to be using a lot of cable, and while making it manually is pretty fast, it's also faster to just pick it up from storage on occasion. Also note that this expansion will require two more biomass burners for a normal vein in your power setup. And if you're using a pure vein, you'll want 3 more instead of 2. Okay, now that the screws are being made, we're going to need 1,000 of them in order to progress to the next 2 milestones. While we wait for those to be completed, we should plan on what's going to be needed next. There are 2 more components that are critical to continuing the unlock. There are 2 more components that are critical to continuing to unlock future milestones: rotors and modular frames. Rotors are necessary for unlocking coal power, and that should be our next goal. Unlike the reinforced iron plates, rotors' construction ratios don't really fit neatly into a single ore vein. The cleanest setup requires 90 ore per minute, which is the cleanest minimum setup requires 90 ore per minute, which is 1.5 normal ore veins, or 3/4 of a pure vein. You will also need an additional 3 biomass burners to power this setup. While you are constructing this assembly line, you should also now be able to collect enough material to unlock the part assembly milestone. While you're constructing the assembly line, go back periodically to collect your construction materials. You will eventually have enough to unlock part assembly milestone. The next two milestones that we want to concentrate on are the part assembly milestone and the obstacle clearing milestone. The obstacle clearing milestone will give you access to the chainsaw as well as solid fuel. So
Milestone
it's
reached.
probably the one to
Solid
concentrate
biofuel
on
created
first.
from any biomass
As soon as
ensures
you start to be able to clear trees and gather a lot of wood quickly, you'll be able to convert this into solid fuel that will last you quite a long time. After you unlock the obstacle clearing milestone, you'll want to head back to your power setup. Find the constructor that is creating the biomass and then add another constructor directly after it and set this one to make solid biofuel. At this point, you likely have the remainder of the materials you need to unlock part assembly. Once you've unlocked part assembly, you no longer need to collect the screws on the container, and you can safely clear the containers at the end of your assembly lines and replace them with assemblers, creating the rotors and creating the reinforced iron plates. Once that's done, I usually start to think about a more permanent location for my base hub. Then I construct it and I move it there. You should also create a large flat area for your space elevator and go and place it down at this point. If I remember correctly, you need an 8x8 foundation grid to accommodate it, but I could be off slightly. And that's really it for this guide. Once you have this basic sort of setup created, you can continue moving your manufacturing from the ground up to your factory floor and expanding it as needed. I hope that this guide has been helpful and it has gotten you well on your way to your next pioneering milestone. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave me a like if you liked the video and subscribe if you want to see more. I'll catch you on the next one.
Project assembly initialized. Congratulations, Pioneer. The space elevator will now automatically connect with the Project Assembly orbital platform. Project Assembly